Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Jeff Champion, Professional Practice Lead Risk for ISACA. Joining me today to talk about his recently released article, Achieving Effective Cloud Risk Management, Upesh Parekh. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me for this podcast.
Absolutely. Well, to get started, I want to know in recent years, why have enterprises embraced the move to the cloud technology?
Yeah, one of the obvious reason is obviously the economic consideration because the cost pressures, as always, are rising on the companies. The company wants to reduce the amount of spend on the technology, and cloud provides a very good option for cost cutting. So that is one of the primary driver. Most of the companies are moving to cloud. Second important driver is agility. So you can scale up, scale down in the cloud environment pretty fast to meet your increase or decrease in the demand. You can bring the innovative solution much faster than you would do in a traditional on-premises setup. For example, you want to, for example, trying up with a new service, innovative service. Then in on-premises case, you would spend probably days and months together ordering the hardware, software. You can build it very quickly in the cloud environment, which means you are competitive. And to me, third important advantage of cloud is that even the small players can think about availing some of the latest technology, which was either to not possible with the on-premises technology. So, for example, if a small company wants to try out big data or facial recognition, uh, the cost was very prohibitive, whereas because the cloud is providing pay as you go kind of a model, even the smaller and medium sized companies can avail the benefits of latest technology. And last but not least is that cloud is providing better security than on premises. The reason is the cloud players have economic interest in providing the better security, better controls. They can spend money because obviously because of the volume, because of large number, the overall cost get divided into large number of players. That is where probably they can spend a lot more than you would spend for on-premises security control. So we can go on, but these are some of the bigger advantages why more and more companies are moving to cloud.
Absolutely. I love the fact that when you need to spin up something, and you can have something going in a matter of minutes, practically.
Yeah, yeah, and that's amazing, right? You conceive a project, you think about a project, you make a list of things you need, and poof, maybe within a day or maybe even within minutes, you can avail the entire environment for trying out the stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with that being said, there's always risk involved. And so what type of risk would be involved with cloud computing?
Yep. If you compare with the on-premises technology, or let's say I have a data center on-premises, vis-a-vis I'm moving to cloud, there are certain additional risk which is involved. Obviously, because the most important risk one should think about is protecting the data. Your data is moving outside your premises. Probably in case of on-premises data center, there is a theoretical possibility that your data would never have been required to travel outside the physical premises of the data center. But when you are in cloud, everything is moving over the network to the cloud service provider. So your data is exposed. The data is at rest with your cloud service provider, and that is kind of a big risk, if you ask me. Of course, there are now lot of controls which are put in place, but data at rest, and maybe you have a confidential data, CID, client identifying data, which you want to process using the cloud, then that data staying with the cloud service provider is a big risk. The second risk I see is and this is not in an order of any severity, I'm just telling you as it comes to my mind. Second important risk is probably the vendor locking. So once you start availing the cloud services, then you are locked with that vendor. It is not easy to port from one vendor to another. Imagine that you have a on-premises application which you are using for years together, and now you have decided to move to a cloud SaaS provider. Your data formats, your functionality features are all now provided by the cloud provider, and then maybe after 6 months or 1 year you are not happy with the performance of the cloud provider. Now moving back to on-premises or moving to some other cloud service provider is not that easy. So that is the vendor lock-in. And what I am seeing practically, in my day-to-day working as a cloud risk specialist, is a lack of visibility. You don't have complete visibility of controls with the service provider. It is for the service provider or cloud service provider to decide how much the service provider wants to reveal to you about the controls. And probably there are justifiable reasons why they don't want to discuss everything with you. But then as compared to on-premises controls, you have got limited visibility, and then there is a risk, right? The insider threat, this risk is obviously for on-premises setup as well. But when you move to the cloud service provider, and you are exposed to a large number of administrators, employees of the cloud service provider, probably who have the access to your data, who are probably owning the infrastructure on which your data is residing, and then that is kind of multiplying the insider threat risk it is multiplying to a larger extent. Missing governance, this is one very different kind of risk which I can think about. You can avail a cloud service with a simple credit card, right? You can just go and subscribe to a cloud service provider, start getting the services from a cloud service provider, and probably there is a small business unit within your organization. The head of business unit thinks that, oh, cloud is good. Probably he has attended a conference, he's impressed. He just approves the operating expenses for availing the cloud service, and poof, all your organizational controls, central controls are now not applicable. They are directly working with the cloud service provider. Maybe the centralized IT team is not aware about it. Something very similar to end user computing related controls which we find in on premises kind of a setup. So and the last is, of course, the jurisdictional restrictions which are put by some of the countries on the data. So some of the countries don't want the data to leave the jurisdictional boundaries. The cloud by nature is in cloud, so probably you don't know where your data is. Of course, there are controls, but this is definitely a risk which needs to be considered, that if you're the country where your business is situated, if that country doesn't allow the data to travel outside the boundaries of your country, then how do you make sure that you still adhere to that requirement when you move to the cloud? So these are some of the main risks of moving to the cloud.
That makes sense. And with the extensive use of virtualization, I mean, how would that affect things with like raising new risk? That's always it seems to be an issue.
Yes, of course. The virtualization is obviously, it is not a new technology for us, but with the cloud environment, the use of that technology has come to forefront. So the one of the risk is security of the virtualization itself. So hypervisor is a key aspect in overall virtualization, and the protection of hypervisor becomes very key. If the hypervisor is compromised, then the entire security of all the tenants which are on the same physical box is compromised. So there is kind of a, I wouldn't say single point of failure, but a very sensitive piece of equipment, be it a hardware, be it a software, in the form of hypervisor, which increases your risk profile. Multi-tenant environment and isolation. So, obviously we know that with virtualization on the same physical box, many tenants can coexist. And then there is a question of isolation, which controls are put in place so that one tenant cannot access the data of other tenant, and is there any data leaking between from one tenant to another tenant. So this whole isolation control becomes very important. Then the management plan and security configuration. So because of the virtualization, abstraction, and orchestration, the entire infrastructure is controlled with management plane. So and a lot of configuration controls are made available to the customers via management plane. So the uh, security of the management plane itself becomes very important. Who accesses the management plane? What are the access controls provided on the management plane? Is the customer aware about the security configurations which they need to make use of to make their infrastructure secure? That is also a important question. So because of the virtualization, abstraction, orchestration, there are certain technology challenges which needs to be kept in mind when we move to the cloud.
This is why I love the topic of risk. So it's so from a risk perspective, how would joint ownership affect what's involved with cloud technology, and how does that stand out?
In fact, a joint ownership of the control is the most differentiating factor for the cloud, right? It is the key and most important factor, I would say. There are controls which are operated by the cloud service providers, and then there are set of controls which are operated by the customer. And then there is a joint ownership of some of the controls. And uh, from the overall risk management perspective, the cloud customer needs to recognize this concept. And I'll give you with one example how it is important and how it is different in case of cloud. So say you move your you move your application to the cloud, and you take services from one of the cloud service provider. Backup, you think that the cloud service provider is responsible for taking the backup of your data. Well, that could be true, but you need to dig deeper. You are responsible for defining your backup requirements. So whether you want to take backup every hour, at the end of the day, you want to replicate the data online, that is your requirement. You have to define that requirement. Secondly, some of the cloud service provider in the PaaS environment make the backup services optional. So they will replicate your data, but they will not take backup of your data. So if you need a separate backup other than replication, then probably you need to avail a separate service from the cloud service provider. So in that case, again, the joint ownership of the controls changes. Say I say that, okay, I am availing the PaaS service from cloud service provider A, but I'm not availing the backup service. Then in that case, taking the backup is your responsibility. Encrypting the backup is your responsibility. Making sure that that backup is complete and you are testing that backup at a regular interval is your responsibility. So this is one of the aspect of joint ownership of the control. One more example, if you permit me, encryption. You ask anyone who has moved to the cloud, is your data secured? Is it encrypted? Yes, my cloud service providers the data encryption which functionality available to me. But then who is owning the key? Is your cloud service provider owning the key, or are you owning the key? Now cloud service provider has provided you with the options. Maybe for your strictly confidential data you own the key. For maybe your internal data you allow the cloud service provider to own the key. There is a joint ownership of the control here. You have to select the configuration, and cloud service provider will make the technology available so that your configuration works. And you take case of different deployment models, you take case of different service models, this ownership changes. So key aspect is to deep dive into each and every control and make sure that you understand the joint ownership of the control.
With the location of that data, how could like from a compliance standpoint, how could that further compliance security and the legal requirements?
Yeah. So probably, we touched this topic a little bit earlier in our discussion. Some of the countries don't allow their data to travel outside their country. Right? Let's say country A doesn't allow their customers' data, their citizens' data to travel outside their country. Cloud, by its very nature, means that probably you don't know the location of your data. Cloud service provider will move around your data across its data centers, which might be located across the globe as per the resource requirement. Today, your data is in country A, where their data center is. Tomorrow, your data might be moved to country B. Now, that is where you are, failing on compliance. Now, many of the or most of the cloud service providers provide you with an option to select the jurisdiction where you want your data to reside. And that is where you need to select that your data resides within the same jurisdiction. But then the story doesn't end there. There are, a lot of other aspects of it. Let's say, your country restricts the access of data, in the sense, if you want to access the data of that country, you have to be physically inside that country. So, how do you ensure that in the cloud environment you have a cloud service providers data center in your country A? That is fair enough. You have made sure that your data is in that data center. But if the administrator of that data center is located, who is a cloud provider's employee, is located in country B, and he is accessing your data for the support purpose, then probably you are not compliant. Or if your data is encrypted at rest in country A, but your encryption key is residing in country B, because your data vault, which is provided by your cloud service provider, is in other country, then again probably you are not compliant. Or in some of the past services, the data is not stored by the service provider, but just for the processing purpose, for temporarily, some cache is created and the data is stored in that cache during the processing. Now that cache, that cache is in the same jurisdiction, or that cache is somewhere where the resource is available with the data service. So you have to be mindful of these requirements and make sure that you actually don't fail on the jurisdictional restrictions on the location of data.
Very interesting. That's definitely a good take. Why do you believe your recommendation for technology risk professionals to change their mindset?
Well, what I have observed is there are two extremes when the cloud is introduced in any organization as a option. There are two extremes of mindset with the risk professional. One is a set of risk professionals totally ignore the cloud as a change to their risk approach. They will treat cloud in the same manner as their on-premises setup. They will kind of they are blindsided by the cloud. They would want to see the same set of controls in the cloud setup as well, which is not possible. They would want to have the same level of visibility to all the controls in the cloud environment the way they have for on-premises, which is again not possible. So this is one set where they just ignore the cloud. The second set of risk professionals is that they believe that once the things are on cloud, everything is fine. They don't need to do anything. It is now cloud service providers' responsibility to make sure that all the security controls are in place and the data is safe, etc., etc. Now, um, these two extremes are not good. We have seen that there are a lot of controls which are with you, and you need to take care of those controls as a cloud customer with the help of responsibility metrics. We have also seen that as a cloud customer, probably you would not have the same level of visibility uh, to the control operation as you would have for on-premises setup. So you have to rely on the what is known as, what is termed as compliance inheritance. You will have to rely on the attestations, certifications which are obtained by the cloud service provider to assess that your controls are working. And that is where the mindset change is coming into the picture. Cloud is there, it is going to stay. It is selected by most of the companies because of the economic consideration, agility consideration, and probably the senior management of those companies have taken the decision to move to the cloud, keeping in mind the risk appetite. Now it is for the risk managers to kind of customize their overall risk approach so that it suits cloud, and you have the same level of assurance which you have when the setup was on premises. So this is where the change in the mindset is required. You don't need to be on either of the extremes. You need to be somewhere in between.
That's interesting when we start talking about different controls to put in place. And
Yeah.
that kind of brings me to my next question. What type of controls would you put in place before an application or services to the cloud?
Well, probably it will need a completely a different pod to discuss all the controls, because it is a subject in itself. But I can touch upon some of the aspects. One of the very important thing, or the first thing before you move your applications to the cloud, is to think about what class of data is being processed by the application. And then your control design will change accordingly, right? So you need to determine, you need to make sure that you know the class of the data which is going to be moved to the cloud. If it is strictly confidential, then your control requirements will be totally different as compared to when it is internal or public data which you are moving to the cloud. Then second important control is related to the data protection. So where your data is going to be in cloud, is it monitoring your jurisdictional restriction? Is it encrypted? If it is encrypted, then is it the cloud service provider's key which is going to be used, or you are going to bring your own key for the encryption? That is the data related control. The third and important part is the availability. So what kind of availability is being promised by the cloud service provider? There are different configurations which are made available by the cloud service provider about the availability, and you have to select the right one as per your need. Backup, are you going to rely on the cloud service provider for taking the backup, or probably you will have your own backup requirements? Archiving, some of the data is required to be archived for a long period of time, say 8 years, 10 years. What you are going to do about it? So these are, I'm just naming some of the controls. Access control, one of the very important control which you need to think about it, how your employees are going to access the data. Are you going to use your Active Directory federation of your Active Directory to make sure that your employees are authenticated and authorized once your application is moving to the cloud? So access control is important stuff. So almost all the controls which are applicable for on-premises, you need to think about them when you move the stuff to the cloud. And from the governance perspective, the most important thing is you set up a toll gate or some kind of a checkpoint for checking all those controls before you approve any service or applications to move to the cloud. This essentially needs to be centralized control so that all the business units, all your support units move through this centralized gate or centralized toll gate, which can make sure that all these controls are put in place before the applications is either ported to the cloud or you start availing a new PaaS service from the cloud service provider.
I love the topic of controls. Every time we get to talking about that, I can just go on and on with that all day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how developing a strong relationship, how can enterprises develop a strong relationship to improve cloud risk management?
So, if you go through all the literature which is available on cloud risk, you will see a central theme of agreement and SLA. Your relationship with your cloud service provider is governed by your agreement, and you need to definitely focus on the agreement. But then, in reality, in practice, how much control you have on the agreement? Most of the time, there is a standard agreement, and unless you are a big player, you can flex your muscle as compared to your cloud service provider. You don't have much of a leeway of changing the agreement. So yes, agreement is one of the very important control in defining your relationship with the cloud service provider, but then you need to go beyond the agreement. You need to develop a level of trust with your service provider. It's a partnership, right? Cloud service provider has economic interest in safeguarding the security controls, and obviously you have your own interest in protecting your data. So you need to develop a partnership and trust. Important aspect is communication. You set up regular calls with the compliance team of your service provider, understand how the controls are operating at the cloud service providers, and that is how you get the comfort. You understand what is the compliance framework, what are the different attestations and certifications offered by the cloud service provider. Make use of it for your assurance purpose. Probably avail the training from the cloud service provider so that you can understand different services offered by cloud service provider, different technologies on which those services are based, and then probably and that is how you will develop the relationship with your cloud service provider, and then you will have a long lasting partnership which will make sure that your data is protected with the cloud service provider.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. That's pretty good. How do you imagine risk evolving the cloud will change in the future?
So, I think more and more applications, more and more services will move to cloud. Bigger organizations have set target of moving at least 1/3 of their on-premises estate to cloud in next couple of years. It could go up to even 50%. So, half of your IT setup will be on cloud. So cloud will have more and more proliferation. And hence some of the, topics which we discussed becomes very important. Risk managers will have to quickly understand this nuances of cloud, responsibility matrix, relationship with the cloud service provider, and start working on them fairly quickly. I have also seen that in last couple of years, many innovative BaaS services have been offered by the cloud service providers, and that will keep on expanding. Every day you will get a new innovative cloud service made available by the vendors out of their economic consideration, and it will use some different technology which you are not exposed to. So you will have to really move fast, understand that technology, understand that service, and understand the impact of that service on your controls. Third thing is that you will see that more and more small players offering the SaaS services to the customer will come into the picture. Probably they are not at a very higher level of maturity so far as security controls are concerned. Probably they will offer cost-effective services, and many of the customers might be lured in setting up such cloud service providers, such SaaS applications, and that will expose many of the service provider, many of the customers to some of the risks. So long story short, there will be more cloud offerings. Risk professionals need to understand those offerings and guard against specifically those providers who are not at a very high maturity level so far as security controls are concerned. So this is what I'm seeing, what I see will happen in next 2 to 3 years.
That's incredible. That's incredible, and it'll be interesting to see in what what direction it what shape it takes.
Yeah. And who knows, we will see a new form of deployment models, new form of service models evolving in near future.
Yes. Well, Upesh, you and I probably could talk about this stuff all day. As much as I love talking about controls and risk management, it was awesome talking to you. That's all the time we got left for today. Thank you for taking time to chat with me. If you want to read Upesh's full article, just click in the description below. And I'm Jeff Champion. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks, Jeff.